That after several university degrees, all right, never let somebody with too many university degrees operate technology. Anyway, well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. What I'd like to do is to quickly run through the work that the Finance Committee has been doing over the last several years. Father Peter has been graciously introduced our Finance Committee, and I genuinely want to thank everyone for the incredible amount of time and effort that's been put in. I think it's very important that before we start talking about the future and we start talking about some things that we would like to do with the parish or that are possibilities, well, where are we financially? Because at the Finance Committee, we take that very seriously. Patrick, if you could kind of put up the financial statement that's been prepared. One thing I want to say is that over the last 3 years or 4 years that we've kind of started, is that the finances of the parish when I first went on to the committee were somewhat missing. When I asked for a simple thing like, can I have an income statement as to what's happening with the parish? Rebecca, who has just joined us at that time, struggled to say, well, I'm not sure we have them. What I want to tell you right now is for the last several years, through Father Peter's leadership, we now have excellent financial statements. We know where we're spending the money, we know how much money we have, we know the cash flow, and every decision of any significance whatsoever, that money that is spent in the parish is run through and debated, I must say, at the Finance Committee. It also should emphasize is that over the last many years, a lot of the general maintenance that needed to happen at the parish, for one reason or another, we can do it tomorrow, you know. Well, eventually tomorrow arrives and it becomes today. So what the Finance Committee was left with was a long list, and we'll go through some of them, of work that needed to be done. And this wasn't work that was going to really improve the parish. It's really just fixing things that we needed to done. And a lot of that centered around security. So what I want to do, if you look at here, and the copies of these are going to be made available in the bulletin. If you looked at in 2024, the surplus of our parish was $148,000, the surplus. If you look at the budget, if you look at 2025, our actual surplus was $151,000. So we are very fortunate at the parish in a sense that we have a cash flow through the generosity of our parishioners on a weekly basis. But more importantly, some decisions that have been made by the Finance Committee. All right, one being the parking lot. When I first went on, we were having a 50-50 partnership with the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and they ran the parking lot. And we were supposed to get 50% of the net profits. Well, it seemed as we did our investigation, we were getting all the expenses as a parish, and we got about $15,000 a year for a check from the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Right now, for the last several years, we've been exceeding $100,000 in that parking lot. And if the Finance Committee had went along with my brilliant idea to charge at Christmas time, we would have made even more. But it was insistent that we go with the town policy of free parking. Again, I will raise this year that why are we giving free parking to anyone? It's for the good of God that we charge in December. But I'm going to leave that for other people to decide. My point in this, and I won't go through the specifics of the number, but we clearly delineate the expenses and the revenues and the sources, okay? Which is important. Patrick, we can kind of move on now to the next phase of our presentation here. What I want to do is kind of break I want to give you an update right now on, well, what have we done, all right, over the last little while. We'll get into some of the repairs. If you look here, as I said just a minute ago, that we felt that security and safety was very important for the parish, particularly the aging nature of our parish. So we ended up spending a fair amount of money on things that were necessary. One, we put cameras around our church. When Kathy and I first bought our house here in Niagara-on-the-Lake in 1985, nobody locked their doors. Remember that? Nobody locked their doors, all right? There was nobody here, nobody cared. Well, every night before I go to bed now, my wife says, have you locked your car? It's things we never had to do before. The town is changing, it's growing, it's still a wonderful place to live, but the reality is we needed cameras, we needed security systems, and we have quite an advanced security system. That's also necessary because of the columbarium that we have put in and the nature of our parish and where we are today. We also put lights in. If you notice the nice lights that we have here, that you actually walk around now and you can actually not stumble because you can see it. And the cameras were about $4,000, the lights were $26,000. We added fencing, and there's still a little more to be done, but that was $28,000. Why? Well, with the columbarium and with having a parking lot for the general use of the public, we don't want people just wandering into kind of sacred ground. So we spent the money to do that. The other thing is we went for things and novel things like curbs, which isn't really a thing in Niagara-on-the-Lake, but if you're running a parking lot, you need curbs. So all I'm saying here is that we've put a lot of money in and invested in to bring things, and I think if you look around, things are much, much better. The other thing, big expense that we've had was a 50-50 joint venture with the diocese, and this had to do with the new columbarium that has been built beside the church. And you say to yourself, why did we do that? Well, we did that. First of all, it's necessary for a growing community, and particularly a community that is aging. Second of all, if I may, from my finance background, this is incredibly profitable. It's unbelievable. The return on investment of this, any guy like me, I would be glad to fund the whole thing, but I think that's kind of against the law. My point in making is that we had to do some upfront expenditures, and we spent as a parish about $150,000 at the front end, and the diocese put about $150,000 to the total $300,000 to build the columbarium. All right. To date, we have attracted just within our parish and opening up, Patrick, approximately $200,000. We've now recovered in less than a year. The point is that we're going to reach break even and our funds returned very, very shortly. If you're only doing 5 or 10 units a year at $4,000, that's an additional $25,000 to $40,000 worth of revenue. In my business, we would call that an annuity for the parish. Now, of course, we split this 50-50 with the diocese. But you should know that we have sold 40-some, how many units so far? We've sold 70 units so far. Ultimately, there'll be 600 units available. So long-term, a very good decision financially for the parish. Now, we also had to do some significant improvements elsewhere. All right, look at our parish hall here. I don't know how many people have been here in the last couple of years. All right, Mary Ann, let's give her a standing ovation. I mean, when I first walked in here 5 years ago, it was a barracks. All right, I mean, it was fine, but if you look at the improvements you hear, from the painting to the big screen televisions, to the safety features, we're fire code compliant, to the kitchen and everything else. These are things that we needed to be done. Now, of course, Marianne's always got another list of things we need to do, and we always listen. But I think we've been making good progress, even to the front of the parish hall. Simple things like we paved. I have no idea why that wasn't done. It was dangerous. The stones and how. It wasn't level at all. So anybody with a walker or any, kind of coming here, it was very, very dangerous. So we did this. So we did paving, we did painting, we did fire upgrades, we did interior upgrades. So a tune of about $60,000. So where you want to see, where did you want to go? That's where it went. Now let's turn to the main church, all right? And some of the things. You all know that 2 or 3 years ago, we had the entire exterior of the church painted, if you remember that. Well, we've also done painting in the inside of the church. We've done Joseph, going back and forth to Ottawa. Have you noticed the statues now? Have you noticed how they've all been repainted and refinished and reconstructed? All right. On Saturday night, I was looking over to my right there, because Kathy and I are always in the very last row, it seems. And we're looking over, and the beauty of our new statues of St. Vincent and others, all right? Well, it doesn't just happen. Do you know the debate of who's going to Ottawa to deliver these? Who's going to Ottawa to pick them up, all right? So there's a lot of people involved. So between the landscaping, the exterior painting, the altar tops, the backdrops, The new baptismal font, the statue renos and painting, we spent about $110,000. So again, these are all decisions that hopefully you would agree are important decisions for the long-term nature of our parish to ensure that we're reinvesting and making sure that our 200th anniversary is celebrated properly. So for our 200th anniversary, you can see that we've done these renovations. The church looks really good. And you notice last summer, we had a student there with the doors open, all right, to be able to welcome people. Now, of course, we had a little tap and pay, and we were kind of hoping we'd raise a little more money, or at least I did, but it wasn't bad. But more importantly, it was welcoming to the visitors of our community, which we thought was very, very important. And again, another shout out to Joseph for arranging all that. Now, I'm going to pause because what I've just told you about is things that we've done. Now, for the budget of this year, there's other things that we're planning and we budgeted for, which is the budget I showed you, but was in very small print, and you'll have to take it home with you. And that is, we still have a little bit to do. I don't know how many people have visited, the rectory. Did you notice the porch? I remember when my mother fell through my porch at the front of our house 20 years ago. Because of the rotted wood that I failed to repair. My mother was not very happy with me that day as her foot went through the rotted wood. Well, that's what we have. So we don't know we know that the wood's rotted, but we don't know about the foundation. So we've allocated, I believe, $70,000 in the budget this year to explore it and at least begin that. Hopefully we're going to be able to fix it for that amount of money, but it may take more. We just don't know. So there are certain things on an ongoing basis that we just continue to do, and I would put that in general care and maintenance of our parish and our parish hall and our rectory, okay? So there's been a lot going on and there's still a lot to do. Now what I want to do is I want to chat a little bit about phase 1 and phase 2. And what is phase 1 and what is phase 2? Well, phase 1 is kind of looking at our church and saying, all right, what could be done to the church to improve it? Those items that cost are more substantial, should we embark on these projects in the near future? At the last meeting that we had a year and a half ago, we had similar 2 meetings. The feedback that we got, we presented a kind of a renovation budget of about $750,000 to the people that attended. The feedback that we got after that meeting was very clear. Well, look, the phrase I would use is, are you doing the repairs just to do the repairs, or are you positioning the parish for the next 50 years, the next 200 years? And quite honestly, we were just fixing things. So it encouraged us to take a step back and saying, all right, if we had a blank sheet of paper, what would we do? And some interesting ideas occurred. We met with the bishop, and in meeting with the bishop, we wanted to seek his approval for this grander vision of what we were doing. You have to understand that the diocese and the bishop technically owns the church, the parish, and everything else. So at the end of the day, he's kind of the main individual that we've got to pay some attention to. And just coincidentally that Bishop Burgee to us here today was also Father Burgee. To me many, many years ago at another parish that my youngest son was baptized at. So I, in an odd sort of way, have known Father Burgee for many, many decades now. But when we went to see him, he was incredibly welcoming. And he had the exact same attitude as many of our parishioners at the public meetings. That was, okay, what could you do? You have to realize, and this is my sense, and people can question me on this, I think the bishop looks at our parish as being special. It is the oldest parish in the province of Ontario. It is a parish that has some means, let's be honest, okay? So as a result, he has an expectation that we take care of this crown jewel. And that's the way he views it. With the columbarium, the history of the parish, the history of the town, he wants this to be protected and he wants to make sure it's cared for. So we went back in a way, and just before Christmas, we went back again. And this time we went back with a two-stage proposal. The first stage was, what could we do within our economic means in the next 2 or 3 years. Let's put it that way. Probably could do it next 2 years, all right? And what are the major expenditures and what would we do? That would be stage one. Stage two was, what if we look further and we said to ourselves, how do we have a grander vision that would include possibility of a parish hall closer to our main church rather than a block away? There are enormous advantages to a hall being connected to a particular parish. So again, we went back in December. We presented what I'm going to present to you tonight or this afternoon. And the bishop was, I was going to use the word excited. He certainly wasn't turned off. He was excited and he was appreciative. Now you have to understand, these are ideas. You know, sometimes every once in a while someone will walk up to me and say, well, we don't know what you're doing. You're not telling us anything. Well, this will be the 4th meeting that I've done in public sector, so we're trying to do our best. This is the time to ask questions. This is the time to share. Anything other than general maintenance, we haven't done. But this next phase goes beyond that, and that's why it's very important that we have some feedback. So let's get to the first series of things that we could do. And the very first one would be our choir loft. Well, the choir loft. There seems to be, you know, there's those in the parish that sit up front and get to see the beauty of our beautiful church and the altar in the front. And then there's those of us that sit at the back, and what we see is a choir loft. Now, I grew up at, you know, at St. Patrick's in Meriton, and we had a choir loft, all right? I don't ever recall it being used much, except I do remember being up there one day with a pea shooter, but that's another long story that I don't want to get into right now. Father Mazerow was not pleased at all. But we have these things, and they may have served a purpose in a previous century, but today are they serving the purpose? I want to give you a few interesting facts, all right? The interesting fact is that, what do you think, and this is done by the diocese, not us, what is the average attendance at Mass on a weekly basis, you know, any Mass, any one particular Mass? What is the maximum number that attend Mass at St. Vincent de Paul, according to the diocese? 127 people. All right? The capacity today is 360. And I all look around and and that's including the choir loft. Of course, nobody's ever up there, except the videographer. All right? If you look at that, you kind of say to yourself, all right, well, do we need a choir loft? Now, again, the argument is, and it can be, that there's an historical nature to choir lofts. I would absolutely agree with that in the original church. What was done at the renovations that were done in 1963-64, we have 4 steel pillars in the middle of our church. There is nothing historical about that. If I just simple fact. And I also want to point out that we've had engineers come in, and the choir loft is a separate entity. It is not supporting the integrity of the building whatsoever. So we have obtained pricing and the possibility of removing that. And if we removed it, it would look like this. Oh, kind of like this. Patrick's using his imagination as best he can. But what you would have would be a very different view as you walk into the church. There's no question about that. So, are we giving up something? Certainly we are, all right? Do we have the capacity to do it? Again, when we look at the numbers, we have every reason to believe that we can. We've had lengthy discussions with Father about this, as well as bringing up with the bishop. I would say that the reaction of the bishop to getting rid of the choir loft was enthusiastic. I don't think I'm exaggerating that. So we'll just leave that at that. Now, there's other things that we could be doing, all right? Next is, I took this picture. When I first came on the finance committee, there was David was suggesting we buy new pews. Well, I could be pretty cheap at times. And I said, why are we buying new pews? All right, let's refinish the ones we've got. Well, you know, sometimes the first answer is the right answer. The reality is that the configuration of our pews doesn't conform to the necessities of the church. For example, to be able to take a casket down the center aisle with the pallbearers, can't do it. That is something that's important to Father Peter. I respect that. The other thing is that we, for wheelchair accessibility and other areas, again, there's a modification that will be required. So what does that mean? Well, that means is that if we went with a new configuration and we went with new pews, that we would go from having a capacity of 360 down to 256, all right? Just to point out, the 256 is more than double the maximum that we've experienced at Mass. So then you say, well, what about Christmas and what about Easter? Absolutely valid, okay? But should we be judging everything for 5% of our congregation's time or 95%? And the other thing is, you could always add another Mass if the issue came to the point where we couldn't accommodate on an ongoing basis. So there's pros and cons, and that's why we're having this discussion here. But the pews itself, the cost difference, and we estimate that the cost for the, where are we with the pews is about 70, where are we here? Okay, the new pews are $185,000. If we were going to refinish the old ones, figure about $90,000 to do that. So I'm not trying to hide the fact that it's considerably more, but what we do is we have a 15-year warranty. We have a proper configuration, and quite honestly, the quote that we've got of $90,000 to refinish and to reform and to restructure the pews, we all know once they start taking them apart, there's going to be added charges. Again, I'm not sure that that's something. So I have moved from the camp of refinishing into buying new and doing it correctly. And we haven't decided on what they would look like, but that's the order. So phase one would very much be refinishing the floors, new carpet, getting rid of the choir loft, new pews. You can see along the walls where we've done with the statues and everything else, it enhances it. New chairs for the choir. I don't believe the chairs are costing $15,000, but Jennifer brought that to my attention. I'm going to look into that. I think that includes the chairs as well as the refinishing for the organist, for Brian and others, to have a proper facing that matches the new pews and matches the quality that we want at the church. So that's what that's included. So that would be kind of stage one. Now stage two is a very, very, very different kind of initiative of the parish. I want to emphasize, I'm going to show you some pictures. Now, is this the way that a new parish hall would look? The only thing I'm certain of that will not look like this. Could it look similar? Yes. We've done our homework because the bishop was very insistent on increasing number and the capacity for the basement. So when we have functions, it could be properly held, the kitchen and everything else. So we went into a lot of detail to be able to get some idea of what it would look like. But again, this would be a much longer kind of emphasis. If I can kind of give you a ballpark estimate of timeline. The first phase, we could theoretically begin 15 months from today, okay? After Easter in next year. If we did that, how long would it take? Again, we estimate about 8 weeks. So we would move the church here into the parish hall, all right? So that's what we would do. So phase one stage one is having to do with our existing facility, Stage two is a dream. And it's something that, so what I want you to, the question that needs to be answered is not whether you like the drawing I'm about to show you. That's not the question. The question is, should the parish move its parish hall closer to the main church? That's the question, and we can figure out the what later, okay? So here we are. Okay. It's important we bring back what the old church looked like. The original church is not what we have today. There was a lot of discussion and controversy. I remember it very well. I've said this several times. My mother was apoplectic when the new design was unveiled, and she came down here. I don't think she slept for months. She was very upset, okay? Change is always upsetting because the traditional, or what we saw before, is very important. So this is what we have that's what we had. This is what we have today. This is what we could have. Now, people are going to say, oh my God, it doesn't conform at all to the look of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Exactly. Believe me, we tried. We've had 3 different architectural firms put in submissions. And I want to emphasize that the vast majority of the costs associated with all this work was private money that was donated, okay? We did not take it out of the day-to-day working funds of the parish. And we went to the more traditional look. We looked to what I would say is things in between, and then we came out with this. And why did we come out with this? Well, we came out with this because it's all glass. And it's primarily designed not to hide the church, but to recognize the fact that we can't duplicate it, and we have to kind of have a modern day, and it is modern, structure around it. What does this modern structure give us? What it gives us is a proper vestibule. What it gives us is conformity to all the current regulations that are required for disability and everything else. It gives us proper washrooms. It gives an office for father. It gives a type of boardroom and meeting room. It gives a congregation. Again, one thing I must admit, when I was involved in the building of St. Matthew's in Oakville, the number one concern was we need an area where people can congregate when Mass is over and Mass is beginning. And you have it after that. For simple things like Tim Horton, Timbit Sunday, all right? What you see now is people come to Mass, Father greets, and we all leave, all right? The sense of congregation, of being able to have more meeting place, is what we're trying to accomplish here. But more importantly, we need a parish hall. So downstairs in the basement, there is seating for 200 people, Patrick? 150 downtown with tables, a full kitchen, and everything else that's necessary in order to be able to the continuing nature. So things like weddings, things like baptismals, confirmation. All of a sudden now we have a facility right there to be able to congregate before and after and to do it properly. So again, remember, the question on the table is, should we move forward with something like this? What do I think it would take? Well, the reality is at least 3 to 5 years, because something like this could well cost $4 million. And you say, oh my God, where would we get $4 million? Again, we're a very privileged parish. We have this building here, all right? This building, we, in the course of the last year, turned down an offer of $1 million. We don't want to sell it, all right? But if we had 2 parish halls, we don't need one. So if we were going to do a capital campaign and we're building, it's awful nice to know we're starting out with $1 million plus. We didn't accept the $1 million, okay? Good old-fashioned land in Niagara-on-the-Lake is still worth something, all right? So I'm just saying that there is the possibility to do this. We've talked with the bishop. Of course, there would have to be a capital campaign. But on top of this, he would not be afraid of a small mortgage over a long period of time to accomplish the long-term goal. Now, we also have to recognize that Niagara-on-the-Lake is not going to stay exactly the same. I know that a lot of us would love it to just stay exact. It's not going to happen, all right? No matter how hard we try at council meetings, it's not going to happen. Growth is inevitable for Niagara. Amalgamation probably is inevitable. And with that will come increased parishioners over time and increased need. The other thing I think what we need is, this would offer modern facilities to encourage the younger members of our parish, possibly to be part of activities that would get them closer and tied in more. I think we all realize that we don't see a lot of kids at Mass, all right? How could we possibly improve that to get a little better attendance, where the parents, are more encouraged to bring them. So these are the long-term objectives that we want to do. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present this today. Patrick, is there anything I've forgotten? I think what I'll do is I'll just wrap it up now, and thank you for your time, and then we'll just take the questions.